Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Q3 Sectigo Pulse. My name is Kristen Santos. I'm the marketing specialist at Sectigo, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Presenting today, we have Sectigo's CTO of SSL, Nick France. Hey, Nick, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Kristen. Good afternoon, and great to be here. I hope you're well.
Absolutely. And joining Nick is Tim Callan, our Chief Compliance Officer. Hello, Tim.
Hi, Kristen.
All right, so before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. All attendees will remain on mute for the duration of the webinar, and we expect that to be around 45 minutes and allow 15 minutes for questions at the end. And you'll be able to submit those using the chat throughout the webinar. And that's it from me. Tim, without further ado, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. So we always go over the developments basically this quarter over the last 90 days or so, and we got 4 things we want to talk about today. There are some changes coming to domain control validation that will be of non-trivial impact to a non-trivial set of people based on how they do DCV today. So we want to explain to you what those changes are, how they work. And by the way, this is industry-wide. These are CA browser forum mandated changes, so everyone's going to be affected. So we'll explain to you what those are. Our own efforts to remove the locality field from our public certificates, why that's a good thing, what's going on with that, and what the timing looks like. And then we wanted to do a look back at 1 year. It's now been 1 year of 1 year, right, Nick? It was basically a year ago, yep. September, that we went to 1 year certificates, and want to see what happened. What's different now from how things were a little over a year ago. And then lastly, that topic directly leads us into the topic of certificate agility. So we wanted to explain that and define that. So upcoming changes to DCV. So the CA browser forum is mandating some changes to how what people call file-based DCV works. And file-based DCV is sometimes known as HTTP DCV, and in the actual, or token-based, oftentimes they'll call it token-based, file token-based. In the baseline requirements, the official documentation, it's actually referred to as an agreed upon change to the website. And this is the method whereby, so you have to, DCV stands for domain control validation. And as the certificate subscriber, as probably everybody who's listening to this webinar is aware, you have to demonstrate that you actually have control of the domain for which you're requesting the certificate. Seems pretty important. Without that, certificates wouldn't work, or SSL certificates wouldn't work. And there's a few ways that this can happen. The way it works in the case of file-based DCV is that the CA will send a secret. You can think of it as a long random number, for want of a better analogy. Sends a secret to the subscriber, and the subscriber places it on the site for the domain in question. So in our case, we send you a file, and you put the file on that domain, and then our software goes, finds the file, knows what file to look for, looks at the contents of the file, sees that it matches the contents of the original secret that was shared with that requester. And by doing that, you have demonstrated that you actually control that domain name, and it is okay for us to issue a certificate. Right, Nick? You good with that description?
Yep, fantastic description. And obviously there's a couple of other methods. We're not covering them here, but everybody may not have used this method. They may be using email, or they may be using DNS or some of the other alternatives. But this is the one that's changing.
Those will be part of the conversation. So we will get to those. Those matter. So that's what file-based DCV is. It is certainly a popular method. I wouldn't say that the majority of people do it, but it's venerable. It's been around a long time, and plenty of people use this method. It is a frequently used method. Now, there are some changes, and the changes are really going to affect 2 things. One is wildcard certificates, and the other one is subdomains. And let's cover these individually. So first, in the case of wildcards, well, in both cases, what the CA browser forum is doing, it is going to limit the way you can use file-based DCV. So file-based DCV is not being deprecated. It's not being removed. However, the specifics of how it is used are being narrowed from what they were before. So today, I am allowed to use file-based DCV for wildcards. So if I want to get star.example.com, and I'm sorry, my dots are not showing up. There's actually a dot between that star and example. I don't know why you don't see it. But if I wanted to use star.example.com, then I actually could, today, I could buy that and I could use file-based DCV and I could throw it on example.com, and that would consider to be adequate for me to demonstrate control of all of the subdomains of example.com. Therefore, star.example.com would be permissible. That is going to be removed. And the basic change that's going on to DCV is that for every single specific subdomain for which file-based DCV is used, that subdomain must have control demonstrated. So in the case of a wildcard, it means you simply can't do it, because a wildcard could be anything, right? A wildcard could be a subdomain that doesn't exist today. And as a result, there is no way to put a file on every single non-existent hypothetical subdomain. And so it will be disallowed for wildcards. So if you're using file-based DCV for wildcard certs that you're getting today, you will need a new method, period. Once again, this is a CA browser forum rule. It is out of our control. There are no exceptions. There is no appeal. It just is what it is. It's how the industry is going to work moving forward. Want to comment on that, Nick, before I move on?
Well, I was just going to quickly say, kind of the rationale or the reasoning behind it is with the other methods that we've briefly mentioned. You know, if I can do this domain control through DNS, that does prove I have control over the whole domain name. If I do it through the email methods, especially if you're using something like an email address that appears on the whois record for that domain, it proves complete control over the domain name. The argument here is that proving control over a particular website or a particular web page even doesn't really demonstrate control over the entire domain name or the entire namespace. So as you said, it's not deprecating the method completely. This is still viable and probably still viable for a lot of the use cases where it is used today. A good example would be, you know, a hosting platform. If I have a website hosted somewhere, you know, my DNS is with my domain registrar. My email is my own email. I don't publish my email on whois because I want to remain relatively anonymous, but I have my website hosted, then this is going to be fine for my, you know, blog.nick.com, but it's not going to allow my web host to get a wildcard certificate for my entire domain because they don't control my entire domain. So that's kind of the rationale behind it, just so that people are kind of aware this isn't an arbitrary CAB forum or this is changing. There is definitely technical reasoning behind it.
Yes, thank you for that. That's some good color. And we'll see that applies when we get to the subdomain scenario. What you just described will apply as well. So let's look at the subdomain scenario. So today I am able to use DCV authentication to gain DCV authentication of a subdomain by authenticating the domain above it. So in the example you have here, if I authenticate example.com, if I authenticate my domain control of example.com with file-based DCV, then I also am granted permission to issue certs for subdomains, a.example.com. And that is considered to be perfectly legit in today's rules. Now, for all the reasons Nick just explained, it's the exact same situation as the wildcard. In the future, every subdomain will have to be DCV'd individually. So the top scenario, if you look at the bottom below the line, I show you two scenarios. The top scenario is what will be disallowed. If I stick a file on example.com, I can't then turn around and get it cert for a.example.com. However, I'm perfectly welcome to put a file on a.example.com, even if I already have one on example.com, and then I can get that too. So you can absolutely use file-based DCV for subdomains, and you can absolutely get a multi-domain certificate with, you know, a bunch of subdomains in the same thing. You just have to put the file on every single SAN or every single FQDN for which you're going to use that DCV method, regardless of the hierarchy of other domains that you may have already gotten control validation for.
Yeah, and the thing to note, I suppose, is we obviously don't know how everybody runs their websites. There's a million different ways to run a website. There's content management systems, things like WordPress, or But when you say you have to put this DCV file on all the subdomains or the fully qualified domain, you do. That doesn't always necessarily mean thousands of different copies of this file. Your website may allow the file to be accessed through the different subdomains. The point is, we have to be able to go to a.example.com and get the file we're looking for. We can't just assume that because it's on example.com, it works for everything below it. Now that works for DNS, as we've said, the DNS validation, it works for the email validation. It's just not going to work in this case because, again, control of a single website doesn't mean you have control of all of the other subdomains and websites in that namespace.
Yeah, now this may be trivially easy to do, right? You might say, oh, well, once I'm automatically doing this, there's no harm in just adding every single domain, subdomain to the file, to have the file posted there, right? It may be that's what you're doing anyway, right? So it's possible some people will be unaffected, but surely some people will, for whom that is manual work that needs to be done individually. And for those individuals, we may recommend considering a different DCV method, and we're going to get to those.
Yes, it's a change, right? We want to make sure everybody's aware of the change as we talk about the timing and doing things in advance and giving lots of communication and notice. It's a change. You're right. A lot of people may be doing it in a perfectly acceptable manner going forward already today. There's no concern. You're right. It isn't, in the majority of cases, hopefully not a huge technical change to adapt to this, but it is a change, and it's a change that can impact some people. So let's make sure everybody knows.
Okay, so a couple other things, just not to put too fine a point on it. Number one, existing certificates are unaffected. So if you had a certificate and you did what was the top scenario and you got the cert prior to this change, it's okay. Your cert doesn't need to be replaced, right? You get to let that cert run for its lifespan. It's just that when the time comes to renew that cert, you're going to have to follow the new rules, right?
Yeah, this is not one of those changes where we've got to go back and contact existing people. They've got to change them. The one thing there, as you hit upon, Tim, is when this certificate comes up for renewal, or if you need to reissue it for any reason. Of course, both of those processes create new certificates, and so you have to follow the new rules. But there's going to be none of this going back over your old sites and revoking and changing things. It isn't that kind of a change, thankfully.
Right. And there's also a concept of what we sometimes refer to as Dcv reuse, which is to say, if I order a certificate and then I turn around and I order another certificate tomorrow for the exact same domain, I'm falling in the allowed reuse period and I don't need to do that DCV again.
Yes.
However, if you order a certificate prior to the rules changing using the old methods, and then you order another certificate after the rules change using the old methods, even if they're 24 hours apart, reuse of the old method will not be allowed, right? So during that transition period, DCV reuse will not be affected, and those people will have to redo DCV under those circumstances. That's a corner
absolutely.
case.
Yeah, and again, I know ourselves at Sectigo, I'm sure the other CAs that are impacted have fairly straightforward self-service mechanisms for you to go in and do that, right? There's not going to be any period of outage. There's not going to be any revocations in this. Yes, it's a change. It shouldn't be a breaking change is where I'm trying to get to, right? This isn't going to be something where everything stops working. This is just a precaution. You have to maybe redo the validation in some circumstances, but certainly it shouldn't be something that breaks anything.
Yeah, and when we get to the action items, we'll touch that point again. So subscribers do have a few options. One is, as we said, you could put the file on all subdomains. That is an option, and that might be a very viable option, or you might already be doing it, in which case you're fine. Another option is you choose another method. DNS-based DCV and email-based DCV still work according to the old rules. As we mentioned, you can get a domain and you get the entire subdomain space with it automatically, and that may be preferable for you and your usage, and if that's the case, consider switching to those methods. Finally, once again, wildcards must choose another method. Wildcards cannot use file-based DCV, period. So those will have to move to another DCV method. And those are the options that are available to you.
Yep. And I mean, I would say almost kind of in a personal suggestion, really, but choosing another method. The DNS-based method is, I would consider, the better one, and the primary reason for that is a lot of people that are using this HTTP method today are doing so because it's one of those things that's nicely automated. It's very easy to write a script or build a piece of software that can place this file on the web server and then even, clean up afterwards, if you like, once we've issued the certificate. Email doesn't quite work that way. We all know, we all live with email, right? But it's not an ideal system. It's clunky, there's spam filters, there's bad email clients. DNS has that automation. So I would suggest, if people are looking at this going, I need to change, what do I change to? My recommendation, obviously where possible, would be to look at DNS because it has all the benefits of automation, but doesn't have any of the limitations that we're talking about here.
Agreed, absolutely right. I think that's well spoken. So what are the dates? So by the CA Browser Forum, as of December 1, 2021, the narrowed authentication methods are all that is allowed. So those changes will go effect as of December 1st. So the last day in November is the last day you can use the old rules, according to the CA Browser Forum. With changes of this magnitude, let's say, we always build in a buffer period so that there's no chance that any kind of weird timing with system clocks or releases or anything like that interferes. So in our case, the date is November 15. So starting November 15, 2021, we will be living by the new DCV rules, even though there is in principle half a month in there whereby we could do DCV the old way. And that'll help all of our customers get adjusted, and that'll help us, know that there's no kind of unexpected behavior with systems or anything along those lines. So as of November 15, we are enforcing the new DCV rules.
It's definitely, as you said, Tim, it's about timing, isn't it? And I mean, these dates are, that time of year tends to be a little difficult, especially for a lot of enterprises. There tends to be freezes in December. I believe there's some relatively important holidays between those two dates for our American listeners, and so that tends to impact it. So we did this change with the 1 year thing, though, didn't we? We also started to implement things a little earlier than the deadline, which gives us and our customers flexibility. And if we're at a hard deadline, there's absolutely nothing we can do. If we have a couple of weeks in advance, then there's always the potential for some flexibility should it be critically needed. So it's a good move, and I think other CAs are following the same thing as well.
It's a best practice, and it's our normal practice. Like every time we make one of these announcements, you're going to see our date and then the final date. That's just how we do. All right, so recommended actions, and I think we've covered these. Number one, look into your present DCV methods. So what can you do now? Well, go make sure that you're not surprised on November 15 when that certificate doesn't work. So this is a good time to go say, what are we doing? How are we doing at DCV? What does that automated script actually do? And give yourself a chance to identify if anything needs to change, and if it does, to change it and implement the new script and do all of that in advance of November 15, so it's all working correctly and you're not going to have a glitch when the change rolls out. So that is our first recommendation, and we highly recommend that. And then determine once you have found anything that needs to be changed, go do it ahead of time. Go get it done, right? You'll know that it's working right, and then there's
no reason to wait until this deadline happens. Absolutely, don't
wait until the last minute. Yes, so that's the main point. All right.
The time is now. The time is now.
Okay, so that's the recommended DCV actions. Now let's segue to something that in some ways is a not dissimilar topic, which is the removal of the locality field. So there is a field in OV and EV SSL certificates called locality name. It's not in DV Certs because that kind of stuff isn't in DV, but it's called locality name. And so there are various fields that identify your organization. There's organization name, there's street address, there's locality name, there's state or province name, there's country name. And a lot of these are well defined. There's a very clear definition of what we mean when we say organization name. There's a very clear definition of what we mean when we say street address. State or province name is your state or province. Country name is even easier. It's your country. Locality name means nobody really knows what. Maybe it's a city, maybe it's a town, maybe it's a region, maybe it's an island, maybe it's a mail stop, maybe it's an oil rig in the middle of the North Sea. And as a result, it is difficult to come up with a set of hard principles, a set of bright lines where you can say, this is a locality and that is not. And what used to happen is that the community gave a lot of leeway to CAs to decide what a locality was. The CA would say, look, this is their town, or this is a general region of the country that people refer to by this name. And people would say, okay, I'm gonna grant that to the CA. In the last, I'm gonna say year and a half, Nick, 2 years, we've seen a real change in the industry where a bunch of industry watchers, with the implicit or explicit backing of the people who control browser programs, have begun to dispute CA decisions. And they come back and they say, this isn't a valid use of locality. You can't say this is the locality. And you wind up getting in this public debate about whether or not something is a locality. And in the event that you lose the debate, you have to go revoke those certs, which is awful, because what it's doing is it's introducing risk, right? That a certificate that you have that maybe you've been renewing every year for the last 10 years that everybody thought was hunky-dory, suddenly someone wants to debate whether or not that's a locality, and all of a sudden you're at the risk of having an unexpected revocation event.
Yeah. If someone deems that it's not as accurate as it could be, or it's not correct, and sometimes this plays into kind of almost geopolitical arguments, like you said, Tim, about whether what is a locality? Is this a city? Is it not? And is it? And then it gets into things like spelling and hyphens and abbreviations and things, and it's vague, and as you say, the vagueness leads to this risk. It leads to the risk that we have to take action to revoke a certificate, and it's unnecessary risk. Yeah,
the word we've been using as we've been debating things like this on the public forums is we call it squishy, right? And in general, we think squishy is bad. We want as little squishy as possible, because squishy is how somebody who isn't interested in the best interest of the certificate subscriber might force an issue and force a CA to revoke certificates that are perfectly fine. And that has happened. And so we want to protect subscribers from that scenario as much as we possibly can. And one of the things that we've engineered as a path forward is we can completely phase out use of the locality name field. And the reason this is possible is that locality name itself is not required for compliance, for security, or for interoperability reasons. The only way that it's required is there is a requirement in the rules, in the CA browser form rules, that states that either locality name or state or province name must be present. And since we always are able to assign a state or province to every single certificate request we have globally, then there is no need ever to have locality.
Absolutely. The state or province name is well defined. Would you agree? I mean, there are finite lists of what is a state or a province in all countries of the world, the majority of countries in the world
all countries of the world. We have done this exercise.
So we have that accuracy
that we're allowed to issue a certificate to. We have a list of state or provinces.
So we have that accuracy, but that doesn't exist for locality name. And so given this the standard requirement that you can have either the state or province or the locality name or both of them, but you have to have one of them at least. It means that we can phase out the locality name, phase out the ambiguity, reduce that risk. As you said, it's removing this risk that somebody on our staff will have to call you up and say, hey, we're going to have to revoke this certificate in the next short period of time. We want to remove that risk for every
5 days. I know it's the day before Thanksgiving. It's out of my hands. So sorry. Right.
We don't want that to happen.
We're trying to avoid. Yes. I know it's Christmas Eve. It's out of my hands. So sorry. Right. That's the situation we're trying to avoid. And the way we avoid that is we eliminate that risk entirely, and that's what we're doing. So this will reduce the risk of forced revocation events, as you just said. So what does it mean to you? This means that going forward, as of now, this is in operation. All certificates will require a valid state or province name. We will authenticate state or province for every OV and EV certificate that we issue. That field must always be present, and the locality name field is going to cease to be present, and we are in the process of phasing that out right now, and that phase out is a multi-stage process.
Yes.
No action is required by the certificate subscriber. You just order a certificate the same way you always did ever, and my reps and my software on the back end are going to do it in a different way that's safer for you. So there's nothing you need to do except make sure that you do not have systems that are depending on the presence of that locality name field.
Yes.
You might say, that's crazy, Tim. Why would we have that? Well, I've already talked to one enterprise who does have that. So it is a real thing that could really be done. It is not recommended. It's not a recommended practice under any circumstances. It's the opposite of certificate agility, which we will get to, but it is a thing that occasionally occurs in the real world. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this doesn't happen to you.
This is a point where I'm kind of holding back a little bit from going on a rant, but this is almost adjacent to what we call certificate pinning as well. But what we have seen, as the example you just said, Tim, but I've seen it unfortunately a few more times, even just this week. Whenever you use certificates for TLS, for SSL, the client, whether that's a browser or a piece of software, connects to the server, looks at the certificate, and there are a standard set of things it does to check that certificate is valid and then continue with the secured connection. It's things like, is this certificate in date? Does it have, a sensibly sized key? Am I on the right domain that exists in the certificate? And those are, basic. They've been defined since SSL was invented, and will continue to be defined going forward. What we are seeing some organizations in their custom software, or even some bigger software implementations, sadly what we're finding is they're doing that and then taking it a step too far. They're going, oh, is this the same certificate? Does the locality still exist? Or it compares the full address, or it checks a serial number, or it checks a public key like certificate pinning does. And those additional checks make the whole system incredibly brittle. And it's for a component of a certificate that is really not within you as the customer, within your control. Now, we are clear this is a Sectigo change that we are making. We believe it's for the best, and I believe, as I'm sure you agree, Tim, that other CAs will probably follow suit if they haven't already, because this is a sensible best practice. But there are times when the details in certificate change because of industry regulation, because of a root program regulation, and those are things that we can't turn around and go, oh no, we'll just ignore that regulation. We can't do that. So if your system is so brittle that a locality being removed from a certificate causes a breakage, then we really need to fix that. We're absolutely here to help.
Something's going to cause a breakage sooner or later anyway, and what needs to be solved, because that's the root cause of the trouble.
And let's solve it when it's a thing that we can help you with, right?
Yeah, and
we can do something about here.
That's not hypothetical, Nick. Next year, the organizational unit field, the OU field, is being deprecated by CA Browser Forum Ballot, and I think we've agreed details on that next pulse. We're gonna go into the detail on that. But late in the year, next year, that stuff's going away. So, that's another example.
And it will roll into our one, the topic we go on about in a little later, our favorite topic, but it's this ability, it's this agility, this ability to adapt to changes. If you lock yourself into only doing one thing, and that thing has to change for reasons beyond everybody's control, you're going to be stuck, and we don't want that. So do absolutely take the time to check. I mean, hopefully this shouldn't happen because you're renewing certificates more frequently now, as we're about to talk about, and things are already changing. But Tim and I have both seen it cause problems in some edge cases over the past couple of weeks, and we just want to make sure everybody's aware that this brittleness is something that should be checked for, and let's help you get rid of it so that we don't have a bigger problem next year or in the future.
Yep. And we're going to go back into that. So recommended actions. I think we've covered all this. Look into your use of locality name and state or province name for dependencies. Think about technical behavior, think about your process, and think about maybe perhaps how you manage your business based on the presence or absence of those. And let's identify those and solve them now before you try to get new certificates and they won't work.
Absolutely. But the other thing, of course, is as you just to reiterate, there's no changes you need to do. You don't need to contact us and give us your state or anything like that. Our validation team, our teams are all handling that. So
we got all
this is definitely something you need to look at. But we've got identifying which state you're in down. That's our job, and we'll take care of that for you.
Yep, we know how to do that. So 1-year certificates. So speaking of mandated changes from the CA Browser Forum, 1 year ago, the limit of new SSL certificates, taking them down to 1 year in term, went into effect on September 1st. As I mentioned, we implemented that a couple weeks ahead of time on that, but this requirement was actually unusually was forced by browsers, first Apple and then followed by Chrome and Firefox as a September 1 date, and then that was subsequently ratified to the CA Browser Forum baseline requirements after it was a de facto reality anyway. And what are the consequences of that? Well, one consequence is that now that we're a year plus later from the last time that anybody was allowed to issue a 2-year certificate, arithmetically, we know for a fact that all active SSL certificates will live at most 1 year, or actually 13 months. 13 months is the maximum term, right?
Yep.
So we just wanted to talk about what are the consequences were of that. So what are the consequences of that? And I threw these down. Nick, I'd encourage you to add to this. First of all, we've seen certificate agility improves, right?
Yep.
So an example is this locality name thing here, right? We put this in place and we can look at our calendars and know when that is going to be completely gone. And it's a year sooner than it would have been otherwise, right?
We're now working to this nice 1 year cadence of making changes where we don't have forced dates in. As you said, Tim, if we want to make this change and we phase out locality, even if it's a phased plan and we have to wait till all the certificates expire out, we know our maximum time limit is 1 year.
Yes.
And that improves our ability to make these changes and be agile. I mean, your points here are all right. Automation, and I think that's the key thing for me. Automation is more valuable. I have definitely seen an uptick over the past 12 months, no doubt, in more customers, more people inquiring about automation. Things like Acme, things like software agents to do it. Or even just thinking, I mean, I've even seen a number of inquiries like, can we have shorter term certificates? Yeah, we can absolutely give you 90-day, 30-day if you want them. But it's starting to have the traction I would like it to have. And I appreciate it was a stick and not a carrot because Apple turned around and said, hey, it's 1 year. But to my mind, it is starting to have the desired effect of driving this, interest in automation, driving the use of automation, and making organizations be more agile here.
Yeah, agreed. That's the big one by far, and the reasons for that make perfect sense, right? You've got twice as much time that you're making your humans spend on this. You've got twice as much opportunity for your humans to make errors, right? So your risk has doubled and your workload has doubled, and those seem like some real good reasons to consider automation. Most subscribers had no incident. Most subscribers went to the transition down to 1 year certs, and maybe they had to do more work, and maybe they were grouchy about it. But at the end of the day, most subscribers did not have an outage, did not have a breach, did not have another problem.
No, I've not seen anybody, to my mind, or anything where it's been, we need a 2 year certificate. Sure, a lot of people have wanted them. I mean, for the reasons you just said, it's less power, it's less people effort to go in and do this. But no one has said, oh, we really need a 2 year certificate.
No.
Thankfully, there's been no system that requires a certificate of 730 days or more, which is been music to, well, a lack of music to my ears, I guess, but certainly been a pleasant surprise that no one's said it's a technical requirement. So we're good. It's one of those changes that seems to have been generally positive and passed with relatively few incidents.
And then lastly, you and I are both of the opinion, Nick, because we've talked to each other about this before, that we believe that this is a step, not the final step in the browser's initiative to decrease term. And we think that more term reductions are on the way in the years to come.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we've talked about this before in passing, and we've certainly talked about it ourselves. It's not going to be the last reduction in term. Now the debate is over when's the next change and how short is it going to be. I think we've mentioned in some of our talks before, Tim. Statistically, certainly at Sectigo, we do have a comparatively high volume of certificates at 90 days or less. Through some of our higher volume issuance partners, certainly, but we are seeing a trend there, and it is driven by all the things we've talked and we'll talk about. But I do believe, next couple of years there is going to be this drive, and I don't think anybody's trying to drive those dates down. I suppose it's being done for the right reasons, but I think there's also now a little bit of an understanding that, okay, for a web host that we've worked with for many years, that has nicely automated systems and uses a control panel that does everything for them, moving from 3 year to 2 year to 1 year to even 30 days is basically a non-issue. It's a minor config change today every 30 days instead of every 730. But for the bigger enterprises, the legacy systems, the telcos, the logistics companies, the financial companies, there's a lot of legacy stuff there that is more difficult to deal with. And I think that the powers that be, our friends at Apple and Google and Microsoft, do realize and do understand that there is a limit to how fast you can make those things change. You can use, again, the stick a lot more. But
that they're going to leave it alone for the rest of this year, that the topic is going to start next year, that it'll be a topic of discussion for 2022. Which is going to be what's the next reduction and how long and when. And I'm going to forecast that actual reduction will occur in 2023 and it will go down to 6 months. So we can go back and see if I'm right, but those are my predictions.
I think you're right on the dates. I personally wonder if because 6 months has never been particularly one of the standards, has it? We tend to 1, 2, 3 years, and then there's an awful lot of 90-day. I wonder if 90-day ends up being where it ends up because of the volume. But I see the arguments.
Skipping straight to 90 days, I don't think it's going to happen. I think the pattern is reduce it by half.
Well, at least this one point we have a slight difference of opinion on it. Will make for some interesting bets.
All right, we'll have a friendly wager. All right, so moving along, recommended actions. Real simple. Look into certificate automation options to ease the labor and risk of managing certificates. Okay. So all of this, as you can see, all three of the things we've discussed have touched on this concept of certificate agility and being able to change your certificates. And amazingly, this is still something that we see people lots of enterprises not being on board with. So we want to take this opportunity coming out of these topics to once again define and explain the advantages of certificate agility. I think we already covered most of this material. Shortening certificate lifespans, as we discussed, this is going on. The lifespans shorter. Now, why are short? Why? So we didn't actually cover this. Why? Shorter certificates actually are more secure. There's if let's say your private key is stolen and you're not aware of it, the total potential attack time that can be exploited goes down. Is a great example. There's less opportunity for there to be a disconnect between certificates and domain ownership in the case of domains that change owners, which is a thing that does happen. There's less opportunity for hypothetically, if there was some kind of security flaw found within the crypto, there would be a shorter period of time where that might be exploited. Or a 0-day or various other exploits that do happen that cause certs not to be trustworthy. The amount of time they're not trustworthy in the event they don't get swapped out goes down. So shorter certificates are actually more secure, pure and simple.
Yes.
And as you've stated, more than 90% of our active certificates are 90 days or less today. So today, this is already a thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a high volume, definitely a trend we're seeing. And you're right, they should. It's a good reason to have them. It just reduces the length of time that problems are out there. I know problems is my word problems is a bit more vague than your list of definitions, but it just means that if something happens with a certificate, and back when you and I were doing this a long time ago, you could get a 10-year certificate, couldn't you?
Yeah.
And so if something
It's
goes wrong with
shocking.
that, 10 years before
It's
you know that
shocking.
person is going to come back and
I
reissue
don't
it.
know how. I don't know how we thought that was okay.
It was a different world then, Tim. It was a different world.
world. I mean, even I think back now to 3-year certs or even 2-year certs, and I'm so glad they're gone because it just reduces that vulnerability surface so much.
Absolutely.
So things do happen. Things do happen where you need to be able to change your certificates quickly. So a great example of this is an exposed private key. We have regular occurrences of the following event. Somebody goes to one of our web forms, and we have lots of web forms, lots of places. We have it on our retail website. We have it on our, customer service page, various other places we have web forms. And for some reason, somebody posts a private key, their private key, to that web form, presumably by accident.
Yeah.
And as soon as that occurs, that is an exposed private key. And by the rules of the CA Browser Forum and also by the rules of common sense, we must consider that certificate to be insecure. And we must revoke that certificate, and we must do it within 24 hours.
Yeah, it absolutely
system.
wants to be done as quickly as possible. I mean, this is one of the things, and one of the few on the list, really, that you could argue maybe the 0 day as well, but it has to be done quickly. If I accidentally, post my credit card number up on somewhere on a billboard or something, I don't want to wait 24 hours for Visa to take action to do it and then notify. I want that stopped immediately as soon as it's exposed. And yes, there's going to be problems and we have to remediate. But if you need to make this change quickly, you have the automation. It's a trivial exercise to do that. And then obviously you can assess why there was the problem in the first place. But it's one of those things that happens scarily.
Yeah. And so there's that. There's certificate misissuance where it turns out that there are, something wrong with the certificate. My favorite example of this is there was a popular tool that was used by lots of CAs. And CAs are supposed to include 64 bits of entropy in the serial number. And it turned out that this popular tool was always assigning the same digit to that first bit. I think it was always a 0, but maybe it was always a 1. I should look that up, but I think it was always a 0. And once people figured out that that number was always the same, that bit was always the same, there's no entropy there anymore. And instead of having 64 bits of entropy in the serial number, they had 63 bits of entropy in the serial number. And CAs in the summer of 2019 had to reissue millions of certificates because of this. Yep. So these things happen. 0-day vulnerabilities, Heartbleed's the best example of that. Turns out there's a 0-day vuln, or the Debian one was another example. Heartbleed was 2014, Debian was 2010. It turns out that there's a flaw in a popular piece of software, and suddenly it means that through no fault of your own, somebody else can go obtain the private key for your certificate. At which point, guess what? You need to change those certificates. Advances in crypto do occur. Now, this turned out to be a false alarm, but earlier this year, there was a lot of discussion about a paper by a mathematician called Klaus-Peter Schnorr, there was thinking that this paper he posted might have led to the path to essentially breaking RSA. Now that got scrutinized by a lot of mathematicians, and at the end, the common consensus was, no, this isn't going to break RSA, though it was some interesting work. But people didn't know that initially. When the paper first came out, there was like, oh, gee, is RSA broken? I don't know. We need to look into that.
It was a false alarm, but there will be a time when there is a real alarm.
Yes, incredible people who were real mathematicians didn't know at first glance that it didn't turn out to be the case. And they had to go really investigate it to come to that conclusion. And then the bigger one that's coming no matter what is quantum computers. Quantum computers are going to break RSA. Quantum computers are going to break ECC. We've covered this in other webinars in the past. I'm not going to go into the details here, but that will happen. It is coming. That is a fait accompli. And so all of that means that enterprises need to be able to swap out their certificates. And this gets us to the concept of certificate agility. So certificate agility is simply the ability to be able to change your certificates at any time. And total certificate agility would be the ability to replace any and all certificates in your environment at any time. And to achieve total certificate agility, you need to be able to do these things. It needs to be error-free, immediate, precisely controllable, down to the individual certificate, but also available at any volume, up to including all of your certificates, and verifiable. You need to be able to know and demonstrate and prove to the satisfaction of yourself or an interested outside party that that has actually occurred.
And it should be said as well that this is, I guess it's kind of a new concept the way it's been put together, but the tools to be able to do this are not new. They already exist. This is not some kind of brand new breakthrough. There have been APIs for a great amount of time. There are now, standardized ones like Acme. There have been agents that can handle certificate installation. There have been CAs like ourselves that can offer the automation and quick issuance and everything else. So none of these things are particularly groundbreaking, I would say.
Right.
It's this idea of wrapping all these things together, but it's also an awareness that it's something you need to look at, right? I'm sure we've said before, Tim, and I happily admit, PKI and certificates and stuff, it's not particularly sexy, right? It's a bit like DNS. It's one of those things that people take for granted. It runs everything. I mean, look at the percentage of the web that now runs over HTTPS. It's needed. It's there. It's everything in the background. And when it works, it just works and no one cares. And when it breaks, we know the catastrophes that causes. But because it's not kind of this sexy, new, interesting thing all the time, it doesn't get the attention that it deserves in order for enterprises and companies to think about things like this. Nobody sits there straight away and thinks, I should have the ability to press a button and have all of my certificates replaced immediately, instantly, and check that has all happened as you've written here. But it doesn't get the attention to do that. And what we're trying to do is raise the awareness that it's possible. Yeah. And you should. The criticality of doing this nowadays is unmissable. If you forget a certificate expires or something happens to your certificates, you're stuck, and you need to have this ability to not have to send people out on Thanksgiving, like you said, and go manually install a cert. That isn't going to work today. It isn't going to scale.
Exactly right. So what are the recommended actions? If you're not thinking about certificate automation, you need to think about certificate automation. Like if this isn't something that you're investigating or is a roadmap item or something that you're implementing or something that you're operating today, you just need to be. You just need to be. If you are on this webinar, you are someone who needs to be working on certificate automation. And think about not only renewals and initial provisioning, but also replacements, right? That's another one that comes up. Secondly, you can't have agility if you don't know what you have. So an inventory of all the certificates in your environment is absolutely a must do. And we still talk to people, they don't even know what's there. They don't know what they got.
The number of enterprises I speak to that still, do you know what certificates you've got? Well, we think we've got everything. Well, have you got everything? Well, we have an Excel spreadsheet. Which is a step above some, I'm sure, but it's certainly not the best way to manage these things.
Yeah, and we think a lot about SSL, but other certificate expirations can be difficult and painful too, right? So it's more than just that, right? You want to think about all the certificates that might go down and might cause you a problem, and then have your plan. What is your plan for rapid replacement? What am I going to do if there's a gotcha event and you got to do something about it right now? What are you going to do? And have that plan and have thought it through when it's not an emergency, so you're able to take it out and execute, and so you're prepared.
That preparation for for a gotcha. The things we've talked about earlier, and we've covered a few topics there. The locality thing, it's something within our control. There's a relative timeline to it. We can, people can replace certificates. We'd like it to be automated, but it's a controllable timeline. Some of the other examples, the Heartbleed example, the quantum crypto ones, they're things we don't know about, right? We don't know if we're going to wake up tomorrow morning, and Tim and I will probably have a very bad day if we do, but if there's a new vulnerability tomorrow, right? If something changes tomorrow and all of a sudden there's Heartbleed 2, we know what we have to do, but we need our customers and our partners and anybody that uses certificates needs to know what to be able to do in case these things start to break. And there is one thing I just want to mention at the end, Tim, and I know we didn't kind of do a slide on it, and it's yeah, you were leading there. It's not something.
Go there, but you go ahead and say it.
It's not something that we, it directly affects us, but certainly we deal with all of our customers that use other CAs as well, and we're always. I know you are, Tim, more than happy to help anybody that asks. So I've always received emails after these things from people that even aren't customers. But one of the things that is interesting to note is in almost exactly 7 days from today, there is a root certificate expiring, and it was a root certificate that was used for cross certification by our friends at Let's Encrypt. Very, very popular CA, as I'm sure everybody listening to this is fully aware of who they are and what they do. And that great team over there. But when they started, they obviously didn't have a root certificate themselves. They created one, but it wasn't installed everywhere. It wasn't on my iPhone. It wasn't on a Windows desktop. And so they used a root certificate from another provider to kind of bootstrap them. It's a standard practice. It's called cross-signing, and it's completely 100% acceptable and fine. But the problem is, of course, is that root had to expire at some point, and it is expiring in 7 days' time. Now, they don't really use that certificate and haven't for a while. It should pass without issues. But as Tim and I will tell you, we had a similar expiry of a root just over 12 months ago, back in May of 2020, and there were a lot more problems than we anticipated. We've discussed this on previous webinars, and certainly Tim and I have spent days of our lives, if not longer, covering the ins and outs of it. But what it did expose was there are a number of problems that no one was aware of, flaws in open source software, problems with legacy systems that simply weren't designed to cope with the expiry, which should have passed without incident. Now, we were kind of the canary in the coal mine, if you like, because people have had this experience 12, 18 months ago of this happening. So hopefully people are prepared. But I guess, anybody that uses Let's Encrypt, whether it's for their personal stuff or whether it's for enterprise, should be aware that this date's coming up. And they've done a great job of publicizing it. I know there's a lot of our, kind of friends and researchers out there doing a lot of blog posts and information and tweeting about it. So the information is out there, but it's an interesting one to know. And I'm sure if there's some incidents in the next week or so, that it might be a topic for us for next time, Tim. But it bears mention, even if it's just at the end of our little discussion today. But it's certainly an infrequent event as well. There's not many of these expirations that happen.
And you're a Let's Encrypt user, that should be in your calendar for sure.
Yeah, and just hope by next Friday morning that there's been no issues, and I mean, certainly we're here to help in any way we can. If there's any problems for anybody that's our customers or even not, I'm more than happy to help for my part. But it's definitely a date to look for, about 7 days from now.
So, if you like this conversation, I co-host a podcast called Root Causes, a PKI and security podcast. You can find it on all the major podcasting platforms. Go there and search for Root Causes PKI, and you will find us. I host it with another of my compatriots over here, Jason Sirocco, who is our CTIO of PKI. Nick is an occasional guest, and we deep dive on all kinds of matters about the PKI and digital certificate industry, and talk about crypto and identity and password lists and all kinds of interesting things. So by all means, come join us if this was an interesting and illuminating webinar. And with that, let's go to questions. Christian, do we have any questions?
Yeah, Tim, we got a few questions in.
Okay, cool.
What happens when locality and province/state are still listed in the certificate? Is this okay still?
Yeah, so by the rules, you must have at least one, and you may have both. And the company frequently, our company, Sectigo, frequently published both, and did that going back a long time. And basically, there wasn't really a compelling reason for that. It was just kind of what was done. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. That will never be non-compliant. And assuming that there's not a problem with your locality name, then there's not a problem. And most locality names don't have a problem, right? If you're listening, New York City, it's going to be hard to argue that not New York City is not a place, right? So most of these things are fine. Los Angeles is going to be perfectly fine. However, moving forward, as we reissue those or as renewal time comes for those, you're going to see that locality name dropping out, just because we're doing that programmatically across everything. And when that happens, you just want to make sure that that doesn't foul up your systems.
Right, and I guess a part two to that question is, what about countries that don't use provinces or states such as Hong Kong?
Every single country has something. It turns out that every single country has something. Now, it's a little funny when you consider that the geographic footprint of a province in Hong Kong is smaller than a lot of cities, and that a lot of states in places like, let's say, the United States are bigger than entire countries. But that's academic. It's from the perspective of meeting the requirements of the baseline requirements, and from the perspective of identifying where a business is located, it still works perfectly fine. So we've got that covered. As I mentioned earlier, every single province or every single country that we are allowed to sell a cert to has provinces, right? Probably every country does. There are probably provinces in Cuba and North Korea, but I didn't research them because I don't sell certs there. But other than that, they're all covered.
Interesting. Thank you for clarifying that. Next question we have are, we are provided a 1-year cert validity at this point. How do we get the 13-month option?
So what we do by policy is we add time for early renewal. So the baseline requirement rules just say it can't be longer than 398 days, and you get there however you get there. The reason 398 days was chosen, if you think it through, is it allows you to add exactly 1 year. If you take 1 day, if you take 365 days, then you turn it into a leap year because that happens 1 year in 4, that goes to 366. Add another 31 days because that's the longest possible month. You're at 497, and then add 1 more day just to be safe, right? In case for clocks and things. So 498 means that every CA can issue certs up to 13 months long, and in the longest possible interpretation of 13 months, you're still going to be okay. That's why they chose what they chose. And basically, how CAs use it, very commonly how we use it, and I think how most CAs use it, is that you're allowed to renew up to 1 month in advance. So if your cert expires on the 3rd of the month, up to the 3rd of the month before, you'll be able to get your renewal, or the 4th, I guess, you'll be able to get your renewal. And at that point, you can get your cert, and what they'll do is they'll append the extra time, so that it will still expire 365 days beyond the last day of the old cert. And what that does, that's very helpful, because what that does is that allows you to have a little bit of time when you have 2 active certs, right? So I have the certificate I'm using, I order the new cert comes, I put it on, and God forbid there's some kind of problem, I can roll back to the old cert while I go sort it out. That's the idea. And that's why
it's giving people the ability to renew their certs in advance, not scramble on the last day, and do it such that they're not losing any time, right? Because if people only got fixed 1 year, they would have to renew exactly on the 1 year date and scramble to do it in 24 hours. So it's almost a convenience feature. If there's a requirement for a certificate that you absolutely need at 397 days, and you want all of your certificates to be that way, it's certainly something possible. But I mean, from a Sectigo point of view, I'd recommend contacting your account manager and see what they have to say, and they'll probably end up in a discussion.
I'm just gonna kind of say no. That's not the point. That's not the spirit. The spirit is for early renewal. That's how we're using it. And so that's what you should be. That's what you should be expecting and doing. And for the most part, our 1 year certs should be considered to be 1 year certs. Next question.
All right, going back to locality. When locality is entered, will it be ignored, or do we have to leave it blank when creating
We'll
something?
ignore it. You don't have to do anything different. You are fine. Don't do anything different. We'll take care of it.
Perfect. And next question, I'll make this our last question. Is GPO the best way to push root or interim certs to the AD join devices that don't have internet access?
That's an interestingly technical question. Yes, I would probably argue it is. I mean, so I guess that's going into some very deep technical details of Windows and how Windows Update handles root certificate updates. It's generally an online mechanism. What that means is when you're trying to be quick, when your Windows computer is connected to the internet, it only knows about half a dozen or so root certificates of the 300, and it needs to speak to Microsoft and Windows Update to get the rest of them. If that machine for some reason isn't internet connected, but is certainly connected to the rest of your network, then yes, you can push out those lists of root certificates through a group policy so that when it next, is instructed to maybe at boot or log on, it will grab those new root certificates and update it. So it is the best method to use in that particular technical situation. But I'm sure there's a lot more technical questions around that particular one, and I definitely encourage you to reach out to our support, whoever asked that, and we'll talk it over a little bit more detail.
Great. Well, as always, thank you, Nick, and thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone else for joining us today. We will be sharing today's webinar recording, so be on the lookout for that tomorrow.
Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.